I said come in! Don't stand there! I said come in! Don't stand there! I said come in!
Man, I love this game. Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl is in many ways the most natural game for me to review. And no, not because of my accent, which I'm totally not self-conscious about, but because it checks all the boxes of a, you know, me game. Of course, I'm talking about the brutal difficulty, the half-baked gameplay mechanics, the bleak and oppressive vistas that I usually play video games to escape, and a frustrating but at the same time endearing extra coating of jankiness. This is one of those games that you either hate or love. There's no in-between when it comes to Stalker, and this applies to all free entries. I'm in the former group of people, it holds a special place in my heart. But if you hate it, and I totally get why, hopefully this video will convince you to give Stalker a shot. So the game's story takes place in 2012 Chernobyl, about 6 years after a second disaster occurred there. While the circumstances around the second disaster are somewhat of a mystery, it's clear that the zone, which is the area surrounding the power plant, has become even more inhospitable than before. Apart from lethal amounts of radiation, the zone is now home to strange physical anomalies and various mutated creatures. So yeah, I don't see any rich college students taking tours in Pripyat too soon. Not in this timeline at least. Well, to be fair, not in ours either, because, you know. Meanwhile, some items have been transformed into precious artifacts, which are sought by rich collectors and scientists and other parties. This in turn led to the creation of a thriving black market sustained by stalkers. These are the people who are willing to, you know, jump the fence and risk developing tumors in order to find these artifacts, for a quick paycheck of course. You are one of those stalkers. And because this game came out in 2007, you also have amnesia. Fortunately, the game is gracious enough to explain how you ended up in that state. Rumor has it that the center of the zone is home to the Wish Granter, a device or anomaly of some sort that does exactly what you'd expect, that is, granting wishes. Thing is, nobody who sought the Wish Granter has ever come back, so the general consensus among stalkers is that you'd be better off avoiding it and diverting your attention to more productive activities, like, you know, eating salami and playing folk songs at campfires. The allure of the Wish Granter was too hard to resist, so you and a group of stalkers decide to ignore virtually all the recommendations of the zone survival guide and go see what all the fuss is about. Something happens there that kills everybody except you, after which you're saved by a fellow stalker and dragged to a local trader. The only vestiges of your former identity are a tattoo, as well as a set of instructions written on your PDA. Kill the S.T.A.L.K.E.R. The player character isn't voiced, so I assume that's his accent. So that's the setup of the game. This is not a character-driven story, by the way. NPCs in this game are basically glorified encyclopedias. Some people will dislike this approach, but I get what they are trying to achieve here, namely making the zone itself stand out as the main character. I've talked about this concept of the setting as the main character in my Cloudpunk review, and I have to say, it's a great fit for a game like Shadow of Chernobyl. Everybody talks about the zone as if it's a living, breathing entity that can either enrich people or just as easily crush them. Some stalkers even believe the zone is mystical in nature, separate from the laws of science, so there are a lot of myths and superstitions surrounding it. The attitudes towards the zone are just as diverse. Scientists try to stress the importance of containment and preservation for the purposes of scientific study, while others, well, see it as just the next get-rich-quick scheme. You may be wondering why I haven't mentioned the game's two sources of inspiration. Well, that's because Shadow of Chernobyl has very little in common with them. Even the film draws very little from the book, making the game essentially a loose adaptation of a loose adaptation. So, in the book, the anomalies and the artifacts are discarded alien technology, while in the games they are somehow the result of the disaster. In the film, the anomalies are time distortions, while their game versions are capable of turning people into minced meat. In the book, stalkers are numerous and more akin to glorified scavengers than professional mercenaries, while in the film the stalker is just a moody guide who navigates forbidden territories. And he also looks like the kind of dude who writes beat poetry in his spare time and listens to Have a Nice Life on repeat. Anyway, like I said before, there's no use in focusing so much on the differences because both the games and the source material are thematically similar. The one thing that's the same across all stalker related media is the atmosphere. And yeah, this game is pretty fucking atmospheric.
Кончай уже.
The zone itself feels almost surreal and dreamlike. It feels like something David Lynch put together during a night of drinking vodka at his dacha. I don't know how to put it in words, it's this clash between the mundane and supernatural that makes the world feel very familiar, but just tough enough to throw you off balance. If you've watched my videos, you might know that I have a soft spot for bleak post-industrial shitholes. Well, Shadow of Chernobyl, as you may imagine, is chock full of this stuff. Collapsed bridges, decrepit factories, abandoned houses, you name it, it's all here. But as depressing as these post-Soviet vistas may be, Shadow of Chernobyl makes them look oddly beautiful. There's something about these piles of radioactive rubble that sends a shiver down my spine every time I revisit this game. Shadow of Chernobyl also knocks it out of the park in terms of world building, and there's no better example here than the Stalker camps. Just listen to this.
Квасу б сейчас холодного. Да чтоб в нос шибало.
Many people underestimate the importance of safe havens in survival horror settings. I mean, yeah, okay, fighting mutants in dark tunnels and dodging anomalies is cool, but sometimes I just wanna sit down, have a drink and shoot the shit with my fellow stalkers. And you'll see stalkers doing just that, cozying up near campfires, playing some guitar, cracking jokes and telling stories in a language that I don't understand. The game really makes you feel like you're part of this loose community of outcasts who all share the same thirst for adventure. Like, I can imagine a dude quitting his boring corporate job in Kiev or whatever on a whim and leaving for the zone, hoping that he'll find an artifact precious enough to fund his startup. Or maybe an up-and-coming novelist with writer's block who's desperately searching for inspiration. Or an Instagram influencer who came to the zone for a couple of selfies but ended up staying there because they found their true calling or something like that. Of course, this is all just in my imagination. NPCs have little to no personality in this game. I hope Stalker 2 will take a different approach because man, I'd love to experience these stories. I'm more interested in what exactly brought these people here than the main story, so I was a bit disappointed that NPCs are just exposition machines. Oh well. For all its atmosphere and excellent light effects, Stalker feels very dated in some parts. The animations are very rudimentary, character models and textures are low quality, and not to mention the stock sounds used for some of the weapons and the footsteps. Stalker is also infamous for its tendency to crash and myriad of bugs, and I have to say that by some fucking miracle, I've experienced none during my latest playthrough. Well, okay, I've encountered some bugs, but nothing game-breaking. So your mileage may vary. I can't recommend any mods because I haven't used any, but I heard the Zone Reclamation project fixes a lot of stuff without altering the original story and the gameplay. When it comes to gameplay, Shadow of Chernobyl is a first-person shooter with some light RPG elements. I say light RPG elements because there are no skill trees and XP bars. You progress mainly by acquiring better gear and weapons. There's also no upgrade system for weapons, this was added later in Call of Pripyat. The inventory is grid-based and has a fixed carry limit that, as far as I know, can't be increased. The more you go over 50, the less time you'll be able to sprint. This aspect may seem frustrating to many, but it's actually a vital part of the overall experience. See, the game world is split into several interconnected areas. Safe havens are few and far between, so you'll actually have to put some planning into the supplies that you'll bring out into the field, as well as the ones you'll be tempted to loot from enemies. You'll be asking yourself questions like, should I buy an entire stack of anti-radiation drugs? Should I bring a backup weapon in case I run out of ammo? How many health packs are enough? Remember, you have a fixed carry limit. Exceeding the carry limit hampers your ability to sprint, which will force you into unnecessary fights and consequently waste precious resources. So no, picking up every single assault rifle from the ground is not cost effective. If you need money, artifacts are the way to go. They can pop up in the field on certain weather conditions or in anomalies. Of course, being aware of their existence is just half the job, obtaining them is another. Keep in mind that these anomalies can turn people into red paste, so you'll have to throw bolts to identify and avoid them. Artifacts can also be equipped for various benefits. You can equip up to 5 artifacts, but very few of them are actually useful, so you're better off just selling most of them. Some artifacts can be obtained through side missions. Shadow of Chernobyl has dozens of them, but sadly, side missions in this game are effectively your standard fetch quests. Now it's time we address the big elephant, mutated elephant in fact, in the room, which is the combat. It's a mixed bag to say the least. Shadow of Chernobyl has one of the weakest starts to a game imaginable. You're given a shitty pistol that barely does any damage and sent to a bandit camp. This is when you'll find out that Shadow of Chernobyl does things a little bit differently than other first-person shooters. Enemies seem to have flawless accuracy and superhuman reaction speed. On top of that, you'll be wasting entire magazines just to drop a single enemy. By the time you've slightly familiarized yourself with the shooting, an enemy will drop you from the other side of the map. At this point, you've probably realized that it's been a while since the last autosave and you'll rage and promptly uninstall the game. I find this section increasingly worse with each subsequent playthrough. This is Shadow of Chernobyl's equivalent to the Hollywood sewers from Bloodlines. And the thing is, the combat doesn't really get any better later on, even when you gain access to more potent weapons. Most of the time it feels like a chore you have to do in order to get to the good stuff. Shadow of Chernobyl starts falling apart toward the end, when what was initially an atmospheric FPS with survival mechanics turns into a linear on-the-rails first-person shooter. What's really sad about this is that this switch coincides with you reaching Pripyat, one of the best areas in the game. Pripyat is absolutely gorgeous. The entire game built up to this point and it's wasted on these janky, half-assed combat set pieces. I really wish the game let me explore and experience this area, maybe just for 5 minutes, before throwing me into the midst of combat. The worst part about the ending is that it effectively contradicts the entire spirit of the game. Nobody really plays Stalker for the combat, you play it for the experience, exploring the zone and admiring its decrepit beauty, shitting your pants in a spooky underground lab, engaging and experimenting with the survivor economy, that kind of stuff. Look, I don't wanna end this video on such a bad note. Shadow of Chernobyl is far from being perfect, but even with all its flaws, I still recommend it to anyone without any caveats, which speaks volumes about its quality. Give it a shot really, at least for the killer atmosphere. If you don't like it, you can try out Call of Pripyat. It's the most balanced of the series gameplay wise, but it lags behind in terms of atmosphere. Well, that'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching. As always, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing for more content. I'll see you next time.